for AI to do what it needs to do, you have to put in the work on the front end to really think about what is it that you're trying to extract? What is it that you want to know?
GTM AI Podcast with Jonathan and Coach K, where you get the latest with AI and GTM today.
Welcome everyone. It is yet another day for the GTM AI Podcast. I am Jonathan Carford, aka Coach K, and I am pleased to have my man here, Gary Schwake, with me from Sparkhire. How are you, sir?
I am well, sir. Thank you for having me, Jonathan.
Yeah, I'm super excited. So we connected a while ago, and I know you're actually relatively new as a CRO at Sparkhire. But we had, obviously, you and I just before this call talking about different angles we could take, and I have a bunch of ideas already. But before we dive into the details, I always like my guests to get to know, I should say, I like my audience to get to know the guests a little bit more. And I like to say the non-LinkedIn version. So if you don't mind, I would love to have more background about you, your journey in this crazy go-to-market world, and just what you're passionate about, where you're at, and give us kind of the scoop.
Yeah, appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, the non-LinkedIn version, I like that. Currently, I am a managing partner at a small boutique go-to-market advisory firm called Yield Group, something we formed about 5 years ago. Also an operating partner at Boathouse Capital, which is a provider of flexible capital to lower middle market companies in B2B tech and services. And that's where Yield Group focuses as well. And as part of that, I've stepped into one of the portfolio companies as chief revenue officer here recently, just in December, Sparkhire. Very excited about that. And I guess probably prior to that, I'm a bit of a mutt. I started a couple of companies myself. One of those got acquired by a much larger software company, a Vesta Equity portfolio company. And that was what I call my PhD period in go-to-market, because I had to go global across a bunch of different platforms, a bunch of different markets. So it was a crazy ride, but a very good experience. And then prior to that, early in my career, I was actually in investment banking, which doesn't sound relevant to go-to-market, but as you think about, I know you're a big fan of RevOps and enablement and things like that. And so a very systems thinking approach to go to market. I've always carried that analytical approach from the beginning. And so that kind of weaves throughout my experience here. I hope that's the non-LinkedIn version.
That's great. I love it. So tell me more about Sparkhire. What's Sparkhire doing? Give me the spiel on Sparkhire.
Yeah, really excited there. So Sparkhire the original company Sparkhire is about 12 or 13 years old. Started as before video was cool, a one-way video interview solution for hiring.
Okay.
And over the last couple of years, with the backing of Boathouse, have actually acquired a company called CoMeet, which is an applicant tracking system, and a company called Chally, which is a predictive talent assessment. And over the course of this period, we've pulled those all together into one company that is uniquely providing solutions for what we call people-powered organizations. So hiring solutions for people-powered organizations. So as you think about where you're getting paid for the people who are providing the service, whether that's accounting, law, professional services, healthcare, education, all of those sectors, there's a lot of nuance into what's required in the hiring process. And so we're pulling together a set of solutions to uniquely solve those challenges.
I'm going to take a wild guess. You have some, I don't know if you want to say AI, but I'm guessing some algorithms in the background helping with the assessments and such. Am I correct with that?
We do, yeah. And that is one area that I'm sure we'll get into is from a product perspective. Yeah. And I think for a lot of people, it's still pretty early, honestly, just because when you move from in the operational side, you can find lots of places where probabilistic outcomes are okay, but many cases when you stick it into your product, it needs to be deterministic, and you can't afford even a slight hallucination. I think we are absolutely leveraging it, but at the same time being very thoughtful, particularly in hiring, because it's a slippery slope to unintentionally bringing in a host of bad results from a bias perspective or otherwise. So we're taking a very thoughtful approach to where we bring it in. And by no means, really, it goes back to using it as a tool to amplify the capability of the humans versus replacing the human.
Man, there's so many directions I go with this, because like I'm I have 5 paths we could go down. Okay, so I'm curious a couple of things. Let's talk kind of larger. We'll get some specifics in a second. As an advisor, going through investments, and like obviously AI has come involved with go-to-market, and talking to people like yourself is fascinating, because you've, like you said, have the PhD in go-to-market, non-AI, and now you have the ability to use AI in some level, shape, and form. And you were talking before about how there's some people in the space, which, by the way, I love these people who are like pushing the envelope of what's possible. But those people always haven't had the responsibility of implementing AI and actually getting adoption and into the process and all the things that have to happen to make sure it actually functions in the company to scale.
Yep.
Tell me, if you don't mind, now you're CRO, what are the things you're thinking about, you're doing differently now as a result of post AI type stuff as a new CRO versus what you would have done 5 years ago when it was
Yeah.
an option?
Great question. And it's actually a pretty easy answer for me because it's been until now, it's been a relatively hard thing to do. As Yield Group, as go-to-market advisors, and we're specifically focused on companies in the lower middle market in B2B tech and services. And the reason that's important is that companies of that size are big enough to have many challenges and pains, but not big enough yet to really have the executive leadership that they need across the functions. And so we step in as that bridge to help from that perspective. One of the things we always see in the lower middle market, especially, is that the definitions around ideal customer profile and the understanding of the challenges of that ideal customer profile get muddied because it's 5, 7, 10 years into the mix when you're 10, 15 million in revenue and you start to hit a wall because you have a lot of constituents now to serve and you're not really sure which way to go. And importantly, the team has changed over quite a bit from the original. And so getting the insights necessary to be really good at go-to-market, first of all, you need to maniacally define that ideal customer profile to the point where it feels uncomfortably small, especially for product. But then that allows you the ability to go deep on understanding their core problems and challenges. And then that's how we go out in the world and build solutions for that, communicate on that vein, be very specific. Prior to AI, that required a lot of hand-to-hand combat to go get, right? There was, you imagine the days of Zoom Info, you pulled up a bunch of stuff and theoretically it looked like an ideal customer profile fit, but there's a level of nuance under the hood that you just can't really see from firmographic and technographic data. Now, this is something we're leaning into very specifically is there's so much richness in those unstructured data conversations, emails that happens back and forth every day between your companies that heretofore, the only way you could get it was to listen to the call, take the notes, or do a customer interviews or what have you. And now we're really looking at how do we actually extract those insights at scale on an individual basis, but then also think about the themes that we're starting to hear across that and can start to bring in metadata so we understand the differences between certain customer segments and sizes and things like that.
Yeah, and you're doing that. So Sparkhire is doing that specifically for the hiring process, correct? Because like we were just talking about, Momentum does that for customer facing calls, like literally that same thing is like extracting and understanding and getting patterns and trends and all that kind of stuff. Because like you said, there's this gold mine of information just from that you don't have. But like from the hiring perspective, there's a ton of stuff with hiring of like how someone interact and respond, what they say, and all this other stuff is fascinating. But
in this case, I was actually speaking about the go-to-market perspective, but then specifically even we have begun to implement Momentum for that very reason, which we could probably spend an hour on that alone. What we want to dive into, but that's been the promise of that is that's the real unlock for us to get better and better at not just a certain set of individuals really understanding the customer, but democratizing that knowledge, thinking about people who are earlier in their career, who haven't had the luxury of a lot of life situations to understand how companies work and the dynamics associated with that. And yet we're putting them on the front lines to be advisors and understand that. And there's only so much training you can do, but the more insights we can provide from the customer's perspective to our team, the more we empower our team, the more confident they become, the more salient their advice, the better their decisions are around what we deliver to our customers. So that's one aspect. From a hiring perspective, a lot of it is not dissimilar, right? It's one of the challenges that most organizations have today in a world where we have a more flexibility in hiring in terms of hybrid and remote roles. You hear a lot about back to office, but for a lot of companies, they're still embracing the idea that I don't have to look in a specific geographic location for a certain set of talent. The other side of that is that it's gotten easier and easier to apply for a job, which doesn't necessarily help the recruiter wade through the other side. And the underbelly of AI is that your candidates are using AI against your job description to write their resume. And so all the resumes come and look, surprise, just like the job description. So how do you discern between them? And so that's how we're thinking about, all right, what is a lot of that information? Unstructured data. So how can we use AI to help not make a decision for you, but provide signals of fit and competencies as a way to help just wade through that mass and then facilitate you through the process and anticipating the next step as well.
I have a couple thoughts on a couple things you just said. So one is, when I was doing my MBA, and one of the classes we had was in HR, and so my professor at the time was adamant that interviews should not be the main reason why you hire someone, because he was much more on the data side. He said, if I had my way, I wouldn't have any interviews, like 0 interviews, all database stuff. I was like, that sounds a little extreme, but he had good reasoning behind it, because like he gave example when people had unconscious biases, or they had something personality wise that made them hire, and then eventually they weren't a good fit and they didn't work out long term. So culturally may have been good, but the job to be done wasn't being done. So what's fascinating around this concept is like using some sort of, I don't know if it's an algorithm or not, but like when you think about the possibilities, what you can do with AI, just around the hiring process and all the access of data you can have on an individual that would help someone find the right place or not, it comes pretty cool on the impact. So I'm saying that, just saying, what do you think? What's the balance between having an algorithm and then the actual person-to-person communication? How do you make it so it doesn't lean one way or the other too much?
Yeah, it's a great point. And I would say, when you described the interview, what first came to me was that it's not so much that the interview is the problem, it's the structure of the interview and how we've built it. A lot of times, most companies go in, frankly, without a lot of definition around what they're looking for. It's this intuitive thing. And the analogy I provide is when you have an individual salesperson who goes in and they're very successful at what they do. And the knee-jerk reaction is, we need to hire more Jonathans. So we just want to clone that. And the reality is, what's going on in Jonathan has a process. There's a series of algorithms running in his head based on what he's here and based on his experience. And we just don't do the work to extract, okay, what are the things that we need to understand about the company in terms of, are they a fit? Are they ready? Are they the right piece? What is this dynamics of the situation that lead us to believe that they either aren't a fit or that the timing is ready or not? It's not dissimilar in hiring, right? A lot of times we go in and we have individuals who are part of the stakeholders, and we line up and we want them to interview them, but we give them no structure on what it is they're looking for, what competencies they need to have. We just count on their personal knowledge of the situation and what they believe are the right attributes, which maybe that worked for them in the past, but could be completely different in this organization. And that's actually, I think, a really good point about what we've seen, not just on both sides of AI, is that for AI to do what it needs to do, you have to put in the work on the front end to really think about, what is it that you're trying to extract? What is it that you want to know? And like everything we talked about from a GTM perspective is only as good as the questions that are being asked by the reps. If they aren't following a process and really digging into that, then you're going to get superficial, thin data that next thing you know, you're surprised by the outcome because you didn't do the work on the front end. No different in hiring. And I think that's where it's really back to the basics more than anything. I think that's the interesting thing about AI, is that to do this well, you need a good data model. You need to be sound in your strategy. You need to understand what you're looking for. You need to prescribe that and build that out, because AI will just get you to bad outcomes faster if you don't do that work.
Yeah. I had this, so I teach at nights for the Brown University and have random people go into that class. And so a lot of them, I have a bunch of people who are in their 20s and a bunch of people who are in their 50s and 60s coming to that class. It's an interesting kind of touch point in the marketplace. But one thing I keep telling people is that a lot of people who are more experienced in the career, doesn't matter if it's 5, 10 years, whatever down the road, they feel behind. And I'm like, you guys actually don't know how powerful it is to be experienced in your career and then have AI, because like you said, as an experienced go-to-market leader, what good go-to-market looks, and it's going to change just based on the personas and industries and all this stuff. But point is, you know what it looks like. A brand new person out of college who may have access to AI and can prompt and do all these kind of things doesn't know that. So theoretically, they could use experts in the field and use an average of all the people who say whatever go-to-market is, but they wouldn't be able to actually apply that real time. But someone like yourself who can take some pieces of AI and then apply it is going to be way farther down the road than someone who's like a master at AI, but not master at go-to-market, in my opinion.
That's a good point. So there's definitely two sides to that. I'm soon to be 55 years old and have a few laps around the sun. And so there's definitely some times where that whole concept of unlearning, like rethinking how you approach something. And this is aside, but it stuck with me. Somebody gave an analogy of an intern, this is a story, but an intern was asked to put together, set out 50 pages of paper in a particular order so they could put them in a conference room and put the stuff on the whiteboard kind of thing. And instead of going on counting out 50 sets of paper, they went to their computer, they opened a blank document. They said, print this thing 50 times. Ran it through the printer 50 times, had perfectly counted 50 sheets and put it out there. Now, was that a good use of printer resources or whatever? Maybe not. But the point of it is, like, 55-year-old me never in a billion years would have thought to take that approach to solve that problem.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of that we have to be careful that we hardwire. Like, we're trying to take AI and apply it to the ways that we solved the problem in the past versus rethinking how we solve the problem at all. And I'm definitely, that's something I battle every day. But I think at the same time, what we run the risk at with people who are you're earlier in their careers in this AI generation is not dissimilar to what we see in marketing and sales from the revenue acceleration era, where it was marketing and sales became very formulaic and we forgot the fundamentals behind it, like ideal customer profile and understanding the pains and points.
Basics.
It just became the process, because getting a little bit better at the process actually worked. And I feel like we've reached the point of diminishing returns on that piece of it. And then AI came in and now we're trying to take the same stuff and just do it with AI versus rethinking, okay, how can I actually make a better understand my customer and make a more genuine, authentic connection by rethinking the problem? And that's something we try to really task ourselves with.
Yeah, I 3000% agree. Like, it's this weird conflict. I don't know if it's conflict's the right word, balance, I guess you could say, between using your experience to your advantage and knowing what good looks like to help guide the AI. At the same time, it's like I tell people all the time in any class or any individual consulting, anything I do, I say, how willing are you to think and do things differently? Because if you're not, AI is not going to be for you. Because there's some things, yes, you want to AIify in an old process, but there's going to be some things you're going to be thinking, what if we could redo this? Because now we have the technology to do things we can never have done before. So you have to be willing to let go of what happened before to do something new. So it's this weird balance between saying, oh, I've done go-to-market for however long, but maybe there's a new way to do it. And is that the job to be done? I don't know. It's kind of like this world where I feel like, I'll give you an example, and I don't know if we know yet from the marketplace, like we're waiting for feedback, but it's like the concept around having an AI avatar who's advanced enough using generative and prescriptive AI to do like the first 2-3 calls in the sales process. So like the discovery, the demo is all done by an avatar, or it could be done theoretically. In theory, it sounds awesome. And based on the product and the industry, could be great, but we don't know yet how the customers are going to respond. We don't know if they're like, I love this, or you say, I don't like this. And I say this because I saw this Simon Sinek thing where he talked about how I've had lots of case studies of where someone applied AI to the customer success part and had a chatbot and whatever else. But he brought up an example of one where he said, I had a company who did that and it failed miserably. So instead they doubled down on the training of the humans to be better conflict management, better emotional intelligence. And the result was the customers had a better experience, and weirdly enough, they had better success. So I think it's like this balance between saying, what are we trying to get to? What does the customers want? Like you said, the ICP being maniacal about what does our audience want? Do they want an AIify experience? They may not like that. So you don't want to force something on them that may not be what they want or ready for, or whatever the product might dictate. But I think it's an interesting balance. But
agreed. And I think this is one man's opinion, but I think the approach that we're taking is first with how can we use these tools to amplify the knowledge, confidence, and speed of the humans, of our reps, of our CSMs, of our support team, what have you. Because I think that's the difference here, is that if we really lean into, I say this all the time, like we need to think of ourselves as advisors, not customer success managers or account executives or account managers or whatever, but they're coming to us because we have the benefit of pattern recognition across a lot of different situations. And so for the first time with these tools, I think that we have the ability to take all this body of knowledge that lives in the heads of a lot of different people at various different levels. And if we're thoughtful about how we structure it in the fundamentals and feed it good inputs, then theoretically we arm everyone on the front lines with the most experienced, the depth of understanding of all of the processes and pains in the moment. And so now if we do a better job of getting to the right people, imagine that in the process of discovery, a sales rep is that much better at deeper. And so the process of getting to the right point actually shortens the sales cycle, improves win rates, leads to a better ACV because we're able to connect pain to value a little bit better. CSM, same way. Like we can use the tools to proactively signal, but also in the moment, like there's a lot to try to remember across a suite of products around not just how the product works, but what's the best application of it in your particular situation. If I can give you a place to go to answer something that specific and have it be spot on, and it helps that customer get to a moment of value much faster, like that's our first step in this before we start having robots do everything, at least from my perspective.
No, I totally agree with you. I'm curious on your thoughts from, how do I say this, of like more of, I don't know if it's the hope of where you think or where you want AI to be, but when you think about as you're moving things forward with both Sparkhire and then as you see things in from the investment lens, not just from Spark, what are the, I don't know if patterns is the right word. What's the commonalities you're seeing in the technology coming out and people coming to you and saying, hey, fund me? What are the things you're thinking and you say, that's awesome versus that's just noise? Like, what's your deciphering measure?
Yeah.
Like, when you look at impact?
So for clarity, we're not venture capital. So we're not early stage.
Yeah.
We're private equity. So there's revenue, there's customers, there's cash flow. So we're not funding the new stuff. But I will say that as collectively from a go-to-market perspective, but I know obviously working closely with Boathouse, how they're thinking about it is that and I think this is where we sit in the market right now, every company needs to have a plan for where AI is going to impact their organization, both from a product perspective and from an operations perspective. Because back to the point of rethinking the problem, back in the day, we would have a certain organizational structure and we would have people reporting into managers. But if we take this idea that we can democratize knowledge now and we get to the point of truth much quicker than we used to in the past, how does that change the org structure? Right. And it may be that there aren't less people necessarily, but we're reallocating where those people are. There's certain skill sets that we need to lean into. You hear a lot in the GTM world about there was rev ops. First, there was sales ops, marketing ops. Then there was rev ops. And now there's GTM ops and there's a GTM engineer, right? That's now thinking about how all these things come together. And so if you lean into that, I'm like, who does that person report to? And what's the role? And what kind of staff do they need? And are they responsible for the tech or just the data? Do we need an analyst? It starts to shift. We have to think differently about where we're going to allocate resources.
I think what I've been seeing as a pattern is that same thing. It's kind of, there's a couple of personas, you should say, I've been talking to. One is the CIO, and like the lines blurring between the CIO and like someone like yourself, a CRO, are starting to blur because again, you're diving in more of the world of what they need, but then they need the data you're getting from your, so it's like this weird mix to where it'll be fascinating to see what the C-suite looks like in 5 years. Like, I don't know if it's going to be a CAIO. I don't know if that's necessary. It's kind of like saying you have a chief electricity person. No, you have outcome-based stuff. So it's like, is it really over the AI, or is it because you have a CRO who specializes in their AI and there's the dots connected structurally so they have access to the YouTube, but it's not responsible for them. So it'll be interesting to see where things go from that lens.
It is. Yeah, it is interesting. The size companies we work for, they're not big enough to the point where you have all of the C's. But what we are already experiencing is we think about implementing AI inside of our organization from an operational perspective. We are literally taking a cross-functional approach that's actually being led by the CEO because it involves product, it involves engineering, it involves operations, it involves RevOps, it certainly involves go-to-market, because there are points at like, where does the product stop and customer success begin when you start to think about this data being available to you and proactive? And importantly, thinking about the last thing we want is some disjointed experience because of the way we've structured our organization. It's like we almost start with the customer experience first and what they need and when they need it and what's required to deliver it, and then worry about, all right, who's responsible for it? That's back to the point of perhaps being a bit more malleable about how we attack these problems versus this is this department's job to solve.
I think that's the kind of theme I'm seeing in general, not just with AI, but like it's this concept around this more silo versus very cohesive unit that's working together. It's kind of, I mean, you and I just talked about football earlier, where you have the system and the coaches and the teams fit inside the system that the head coach is running. And he's running a system versus whatever assistant coach is running their defense and offense and special teams all on their own. It's not, it's within a system of thought that the head coach is leading. And I think we're getting more and more, which is strange. I'm saying this out loud because you would have thought it would have been done in the first place, but it hasn't been. It's been so siloed in like marketing is their thing, and then sales, and they don't talk. And what do we do with this for?
Even
It's just
CS,
fascinating.
right?
Yeah.
For a long time, it was we close the deals and throw it over the wall to CS and let them figure it out.
Go
I
have
couldn't
fun.
agree more. That's the
Yeah.
systems thinking concept is from the beginning. And that's why, again, for recovering investment bankers, I like to say, and me, is thinking about like how it's a multivariate equation and how they all, and a change here actually affects other parts of the equation, but not necessarily to the positive of outcomes.
Right.
And so back to your point about siloed marketing, marketing's doing all this stuff and it looks like it's successful, only to realize that there's a lot of garbage that's being thrown over the wall to sales. And now we have to devote more resources to carving through that. And we now have a disjointed experience, and the ones that we want to get aren't getting the best experience. And so like we actually went backwards despite one function actually quote unquote hitting its goals. And I think that this dynamic of how people now have access to information, what have you, is forcing this more systems thinking approach to go to market. And it gets harder as you get bigger, right? You start talking about the legitimately, you need, I don't know, 25 people on a marketing team, and you've got regions of sales reps that are all over. Like, how do you really operate that as a system, right? It's not for the faint of heart.
No, it's not. It's a beast. I've been on both sides where you're like building out from the structure up to having to redefine it in 1,000-person org. It's crazy on both sides.
Yeah. Yeah.
Last question for you before we go. And I'm just curious for people listening who are like yourself, thinking about strategy for next year, both for go-to-market and AI, what's the things you say, what should people avoid and what should they be doubling down on for this next year, in your opinion?
Yeah, I'd love other people to answer that for me because I'd love their perspectives. I think we all feel like everybody else is doing more than we are. And the reality is it's like we're all trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
I think for me, just staying to the North Star of what is it you're trying to accomplish? What is your goal? Just regardless of the tool, like what are we trying to do? And then let's think about the places where AI can step in. And I think for us, for my personal opinion, is really leaning into unstructured, probabilistic outcomes. Like, I don't want you to tell me yes or no. I just want you to tell me where to focus. That's how we're thinking about it, both in terms of our own product as well as internally in the organization. And honestly, I think just like anything brand new, like we have to invest a little bit and make a bet if we're going to operationalize something, but also be careful that we're not pouring concrete too early, because it's going to change. It's going to change a lot. And so I think this is more of a process than it is a project or a job or what have you. And so for us, it's really leaning into those fundamentals. Like, number one is we really know our ideal customer profile. We fall in love with their problems and are in pursuit of how can we get better and better at understanding that, so that we can get better and better at providing solutions for that. And if we do that, the rest gets a lot easier. And so that's probably our primary point. And the same thing from a product perspective is, if we do that, then we can see where an AI capability may accelerate that, maybe a force multiplier in a certain area, and start simple. Because back to that point of what's the art of the possible, but then when you get down into actually making it something that delivers a business outcome, start simple. And it's better to start simple and make sure it's pervasive and everybody sees value from it. And again, think of it as a process where you can continue to step your way through it.
Yeah, I think it's sound advice for me, because like you said, it's really easy with all the technologies coming out. And every week I keep thinking, like, one of these weeks when I do these updates on my newsletter, I'm not going to have very much to talk about. I've never had that in a year and a half.
It's going to be a while, I think. Yeah.
It's crazy. The problem is there's so much noise. I've got to filter like what to actually talk about. So I can see how it's really overwhelming, but like to your point though, I think when you focus on the simple and impactful and what the actual goals are versus saying, hey, it's cool, new shiny tools, who cares? What's the goal? I think that's where you need to focus, which I love. Gary, thank you so much. Your website, make sure people hear it before I go, is sparkhire.com. I'll make sure I have it in the show notes. And what's the best way to people get in touch with you? Just through LinkedIn? Are you okay if I share your profile?
Okay? That'd be great. Yeah, LinkedIn's a great way to do it. I am admittedly intermittently hosting, but frequently lurking.
That's okay. I'm one of those crazy posting people, and it's okay. Funny enough, it gets my brain thing around content, but it's one of these days I'm going to take a break.
Yeah.
Not soon, but it'll be one of these days. But Gary, it's been my pleasure, my man. Thank you so much for coming on, and I appreciate you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jonathan. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the GTM AI Podcast. Please follow, subscribe, like, comment, and come back for more.